Education requires costly resources like time and money, which are often hard to find, but those who do invest these resources often under pressure, not just because they often improve their financial situations, but because their minds are richer too. A very good morning and a warm welcome to our chief guest, Professor Dr. Sarman Singh, Director AIMS Bhopal, Honorable Vice Chancellor Lieutenant General VK Sharma, Pro Vice Chancellor Professor Dr. MP Kaushik, today's guest speaker Professor Dr. Vikas Jain, ICER Bhopal, Dean Academics and Director AIB Professor Dr. R.S. Tomar, Deans, HOIs, faculties of AIB, and other institute of AUMP. Learn delegates from corporate and academia, and my dear students. I, Dr. Pallavi Singh Chauhan, Assistant Professor AIB, feels privileged to welcome you all on behalf of MIT Institute of Biotechnology, MIT University, Madhya Pradesh, Gwalior, to the third national workshop comes hand-on training on advanced techniques in molecular biology, medical biotechnology, industrial microbiology, and bioinformatics. Today, we all gathered here as wisdom comes not from education and learning. As a genius said, the aim of education is the knowledge, not of the fact, but of the values. It is on the occasion like this we get opportunity to test our knowledge and understanding. We look forward to get an exposure about what the best of the brains thinks about emerging techniques. To make this event a blessed one, we invoke Goddess Saraswati by Saraswati Vanna for seeking their choicest blessing.
शुभं कुरुध्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरुध्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः.
Thank you. The guiding force behind our constant effort is Honorable Vice Chancellor Lieutenant General VK Sharma. I feel immense pleasure to introduce you Honorable Vice Chancellor Lieutenant General VK Sharma, Ati Vishisht Seva Medal. Lieutenant General VK Sharma is an alumnus of erstwhile King George School, Shimla. He did BTech from College of Military Engineering, Pune, AmTech degree from the Pune University and MMS from Osmania University, all in first class with honors. He joined the National Defense Academy and passed out as a permanent commissioned army officer from Indian Military Academy in 1972. He was granted the President's Commission in the Corps of Signal in the Indian Army. General Sharma is an excellent academician too. Under his able guidance, MIT University Madhya Pradesh has grown up leaps and bounds today towards excellence and has been awarded as the best private university of the Madhya Pradesh thrice, first in year 2014, then in year 2017, and again in year 2021. May I now request Honorable Vice Chancellor Lieutenant General VK Sharma for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pallavi Singh Chauhan.
Thank you, sir.
Our very respected and honorable chief guest, Professor Dr. Sarman Singh, Dr. MP Kaushik, the Pro Vice Chancellor, Dr. R.S. Tomar, Director of MIT Institution of Biotechnology and Dean Academics, all the panelists, and all the dear participants who are going to join this 3 days national workshop on a very pertinent topic, especially in this pandemic world, that is the training, hands-on training on advanced techniques in molecular biology, medical biotechnology, industrial microbiology, and bioinformatics, which will be conducting over a period of next 7 days. There are 40 students who have registered for this, and needless to say that since it is a workshop, it has to be done in a physical mode, except for 1 or 2 students who are in hybrid mode online. Remaining all participants will be actually taking training in the laboratories, which will be assigned by Director AIB and those who are organizing this workshop for the next 7 days. The pandemic has taught us that there is no way out from the disease. The only way out which seems to be is, number one, to increase your immunity and to be resistant to diseases which are prevalent. Immunity can be increased by making lifestyle changes, which require tremendous amount of discipline, tremendous amount of willpower, and above all, tremendous amount of mental attitude to change both these things. If we do that, we maintain a lifestyle, we control our intake, we control the duration, we control the amount that we eat, we control what we eat, we control and do exercise, we control our weight, which is single biggest factor for induction of more disease, then half the problem gets solved. I remember when I was young and I was a junior captain, age of about 24 years, 23 years, and I reported to my commanding officer, I said, sir, so-and-so, who's a captain, he's sick. So he said, fine, I pray to God that he recovers soon. After about 1 month again, I reported, sir, so-and-so is again sick. He said, what's wrong with this fellow? He said, he doesn't deserve my prayers. I said, why are you saying that? You are being very harsh. He said, no, I'm not being harsh. He's such a young fellow. He's falling sick everywhere. So often he's falling sick. Something wrong with him. And what is the sickness? It is common cold or it is viral fever. He said, it should not be happening. The person is to be blamed. I was surprised at the attitude of my commanding officer. I said, look, this heartless fellow, how he is talking. The man is sick. Later on, I realized there was a point in what he was saying. Such young people should not be falling sick. Why? And what he told, he says, diseases everywhere. The microbes, the germs, they are there in the air. They are roaming around everywhere. They are there in dirt, filth, everything is there. But you have to make your body strong that it does not get affected by all these things. So I realized that later as I grew up in life, what he said, there was a lot of weight in that. But now, how we can overcome these things, knowing that in this world, disease is there, right? Even our scriptures say, there are 4 things which a man or a person who is born on this world has to bear. The birth, the disease, old age, and death. He says, these everybody will suffer. That's what our scriptures say. But our scriptures also say that to control all this, it is possible. The micro elements can only be controlled by micro elements better because they interact at that level. So therefore, when we say that molecular biology, because molecular biology will have those kind of medicines which are interacting with our various cells in the body at micro level. Medical biotechnology, of course, because it is all related to what is happening inside us. Actually, all the wise people say that there is a universe inside us, complete universe. Like if you see the number of stars, the number of galaxies, the number of planets which we see, and number of extraterrestrial bodies which we see, and if we compare the numbers with the number of platelets which we have, number of RBCs, number of white blood corpuscles, number of so many other living mechanisms and organisms which we have within us, then you will find that the numbers are almost the same. Very surprising, but that is what the fact is. And when you know what happens, when the count level of any of these goes outside the normal levels, we know that then we are surely suffering from disease. So with that kind of a thing which is there inside us, and a man today knows as little about outside what is happening and equally little about what is happening inside. Although science and technology is making great strides and efforts to control what is happening inside, but the knowledge of inside is equally important as the knowledge of outside. Industrial microbiology is very important because today it is through this that the production of vaccines, the production of other drugs which is taking place, which will ensure that we are able to sustain a disease-free life, which is the aim of all human existence. When we talk about happiness in life, and according to Mr. Khushwant Singh, a famous writer, he said that the happiness is dependent much on health, much dependent on health. Your health, unless it is 100% fine, you will not be 100% happy. Any reduction in your health will reduce your happiness levels. Whatever is the bank balance you are holding, you may be holding crores of worth property, you may be the king of the world. But if you are not healthy, if you are not fit, you cannot be happy. I think with that background, let's all understand the importance of health. And to preserve health, since we have to deal with microbes which are very small living beings which are living inside us, they get affected and we become unhealthy. So therefore, to deal at microbiological level, to deal with industrial biotechnology, to deal with those kind of things, it is very important. The importance of today's workshop is well understood by all and by everyone. First of all, I would like to compliment Dr. R.S. Tomar and his team for having thought about it, for having brought all these students who are wanting to learn about it together. And I also wish to compliment all the participants who have expressed their desire and who have joined this workshop, because it is only through practical knowledge and not through talks alone that one can actually make a difference to the society. We have to improve our skills. And India, with such large population, and especially such large population of the younger people, must make the difference in the world to ensure that we become leaders in inventing our own vaccines, in inventing our own procedures, in inventing our own medicines, which can make a difference not only to India, but to the world. And for that, we have to have thorough knowledge of what is being done, how it is being done, why it is being done, and how it can be done better. Not necessarily that whatever the Western world is doing is correct and the ultimate. No. It has been proved now because of lifestyle that the Western world is following. The effect of Corona on Western world has been much worse than it has been in India. So with all this, I wish the organizers, I congratulate once again, and I wish this workshop for 7 days a great success. And to the participants, my advice, please make use of the time that you have here in the laboratories. Ask questions, do research, search the literature which is already available worldwide and create new knowledge. The aim of every university is also, one of the aims is to create new knowledge. And of course, delivering knowledge, we all are doing. But let us create new knowledge through this workshop. So I wish everybody all the very best. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to express my views, and all the very best. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Your thought-provoking address set a perfect platform for the event. I feel immense pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Sarman Singh. The academic journey of Dr. Sarman Singh began with the secondary education from Aligarh, UP, and graduation in biological sciences from Agra University, with the real stepping stone being degree in medicine and surgery from Elite King George Medical College, Lucknow. And from here, there was no looking back. By 1985, he had obtained a postgraduate diploma in hospital administration and later pursued his doctorate in medicine with a specialization in medical microbiology from Postgraduate Institute of Medical and Research, Chandigarh, in 1987. He has 6 books, 42 book chapters, and more than 301 research publications, mostly in international journals. He has six patents and innovations. Two of these inventions have been commercialized. One invention, that is rapid KE16 test for Kala Azar diagnosis, has been taken up by the Government of India in its National Kala Azar Control Program. I now request Professor Dr. Sarman Singh to kindly address the seminar.
Thank you, Pallavi. Thank you. Thank you, respected Vice Chancellor, Lieutenant General Sarmaji, Dr. Kaushik, Dr. Tomar. Probably Dr. Tomar, we are meeting second time. Earlier also, I had opportunity to interact with him and visiting your university physically. But we all know that this time, every time we should take it, as a blessing in disguise. The Corona has made us, rather it has been a compulsion that we should meet through online modes, but it also has many advantages. As we know that today, as you all must be knowing that we are touching about 100 crore figure of the vaccination in India, and there are a lot of celebration throughout the country. So I had one talk already on the NDTV at 9 to 9:30. I am having another from 11:30 to 12 in the ABP News. Then I am having at 3:30 with the Ministry of Science and Technology, and at 4:30 I am having with the Doordarshan Madhya Pradesh. So all these celebrations are there, but despite all these things, I am with you. It was just not possible to be with all these platforms if it was not online physical form. I could have gone either to Gwalior or to Bhopal or to Delhi, like that. So now in the evening, I will be having the Indo-US program at 7:30, and the meeting will be, we will be connecting with the US partners. So, in one day, I can cover all these things despite being, busy schedule. I am so happy to be with you because Dr. Tomar, I committed it. We were not knowing that on this very day, we will be touching this landmark figure of 100 crore. But anyways, fortunately, this slot I kept because I already committed. So love of the MIT University and Dr. Tomar. So thank you once again for giving me this opportunity and inviting me, Dr. Tomar Saab. We know that very rightly, Lieutenant General, your Vice Chancellor Saab, he was very nicely explaining that how our immunity and how our young people they should take care of their health and how their immunity plays significant role, rather most important role. And he was mentioning the ancient histories and our the Vedas and all these things. But it is also true that the life, as you grow older, you get immunocompromised, and therefore he was emphasizing and re-emphasizing that how immunity plays very significant role. Today we know that the corona is also one of the disease which is very closely associated, or I would say we know that the immunity plays significant role in controlling corona infection. Today, the topic is molecular biology, so I will not go into detail, but definitely we know that immunity is also part of the molecular system. But I will come to the topic. I am really happy that earlier also I know that MIT University has been doing this kind of workshops, and I was discussing with Dr. Tomar. So he was saying, and your Honorable BC was also saying that it is kind of hybrid mode. But we know that molecular biology basically is a science of hands-on techniques. And I'm sure that most of your students, they will be learning the techniques. We know that when we talk of 1970s, when I was a student, we all know that RNA, DNA structures were just understood. People were not knowing more than that. But in last 50 years, we have, the molecular biology per se has expanded in all dimensions. Now we have not limited to, earlier we used to think that it is a subject of only microbiologists and biochemists, but now it has, the molecular biology has become integral part of you can name anything. And it is not only health we know we are talking about. It has importance in the agriculture, it has in veterinary science, it has in the environment and industry we were talking about. It is also having the impact in the chemistry, because sometimes many chemists, if you talk, they say that molecular biology is nothing else but the chemistry, because DNA, RNA, they also have the chemical components. So therefore, they also claim that molecular biology is a chemistry. Physicists, if you ask physics, they say that nothing moves without physics. So this is molecular biology, nothing but physics. So, everybody can claim, but definitely also the social scientists these days, they have also realized that molecular biology also becomes integral part of our social system. So sociologists, they also, they claim that they also need to understand the molecular biology, because we know that biotechnology and molecular biology these days, they are playing very significant role in our social system and sociology. What kind of genes you have, how the epidemics and endemics they spread, what genetic factors they influence our disease pattern and all kind of things. And then of course we come to that our ultimately the economics and the country's growth. They are also integral, of the molecular biology is integral to that also, because these days we know that the commerce has become very significant, and no country these days can grow without the use of molecular biology or molecular tests, because until otherwise you diagnose the disease, you cannot treat. So for diagnosis, most of the tools to understand and to diagnose diseases, and your Honorable Vice Chancellor was giving examples, so I will not go into it, but definitely we know that the vaccine is also molecular biology. So if you are not able to adopt the molecular biology in your industry, or I should say in your economic strategies, obviously no country can develop or progress. So therefore the molecular biology or the biotechnology these days, they have become interchangeable. So without these techniques, no country can progress, no country can combat the diseases. Otherwise, the old dictum that this is only used for molecular or infectious disease diagnosis or other things, now it has huge scope. Now recombinant DNA technology, or the all kinds of the vaccine development, diagnostic kit development, we can now develop the new DNA per se. As such, we can synthesize. We also know that these days the technological developments, they have grown exponentially. I remember that when the PCR came in 1981, and I joined very young assistant professor at that time, and in those days, Department of Biotechnology was established in 88 in India as a part of Department of Science and Technology. So the mandate, because molecular biology was just, it was emerging in the 80s. So 1988, Department of Science and Technology, they carved out one department of biotechnology. That mandate was only to concentrate on molecular biology and biotechnology. And in those days, in early 92 to almost 2001, almost 8 or 9 years, the Department of Biotechnology continued to support me in AIIMS Delhi to hold this kind of workshop. So there was a earlier HR division in the Department of Biotechnology. Every year we used to hold up to 1 week to 4 weeks certificate course, because many people, they were not knowing what is molecular biology. They were not even knowing that what is PCR. I remember very funny story when I wrote one project, and we wrote that we need one PCR machine. You will be maybe you will laugh that, you know, in the section officer, scientific officer used to be called that time. Now we have scientist A, B, C, D, E. So scientific officer commented that why you need PCR? This is a police van. Why? So that those were the days people were not knowing. So what is PCR? So the things have gone, you know, a paradigm shift these days. Those days we were only training that, you know, how the DNA is extracted, and that too a very conventional method, you know, alcohol and you know, the conventional you know, purification system. These days the most of the molecular biology has become automated, and therefore I was saying that physics has become integral part of the molecular biology, and in many ways. And then as I was saying, that it has not remained limited to the DNA extraction, gel, you know, running, and then, you know, southern hybridization or northern hybridization or western blot. It has grown in all directions, as I was saying. And I'm sure that most of you must be knowing, that those who are related to molecular biology, that we have various kinds of omics. Now we have subdivisions of molecular biology. These days people say molecular biology is an old, you know, name. Now we have various omics. We have genomics, we have proteomics, we have liptomics, we have the metabolomics, we have the glycomics, epigeneticomics, and several other omics. So these all things are coming up, and therefore it is, I think, various things need to be discussed, and I'm sure that you will be teaching this, and I am sure that, you know, 7 days you will take care of some of these things, even though I know that these days many of the software driven things are there. I remember, I think 4 or 5 years back when I was in your university, till that time it was in growing stage, but every year the molecular biology and tools and, you know, devices, they are increasing and being developed. These days the software and the automation has become real, you know, I should say that a phenomena which is known to everybody. I am not sure that, you know, you will be teaching. Of course, this is very important, that your student, they must know the basics, that how the molecular biology and the old techniques, and how they should extract the DNA, how they should, you know, pour the gel, they should, you know, balance the pH of the buffer, and how it should run, what the smiling gel, what is weeping gel, and all these things. But on the same time, I think this is also the time that your student, many of the students these days, the students, they also come prepared many times, and then you will realize that many of the students might ask you that these days there are various, you know, innumerable softwares which are available, and hardly in any diagnostic laboratory, which is high-end laboratory, or the industrial laboratory, or the I should say the high throughput laboratory, they are using these conventional systems. So the throughput is there. The cost has also come down. Like, you know, I will give you an example of the whole genome sequencing and RNA and DNA editing. So the whole genome sequencing earlier, you know, Sanger's technology, which used to take, I'm sure that many of you must be knowing, you must have read, several years. The whole human genome sequencing took several, I think more than 3 years. So, and now it is possible that, you know, the genome, like human genome, can be done within few months. So that is there, and, you know, the most of the things even in my laboratory, whether it is in Delhi or even in Bhopal, many of the instruments they have become redundant. They are not required, and the funding agencies and the administrator like vice chancellor and director like me also these days we advise that you need not to have your own the sequencing system, because commercially you ask the various companies in Bangalore and Hyderabad, they are commercially so cheap and faster. They can do the not only sequencing, but also they can give you the complete analysis and bioinformatics. Because earlier, the Sanger technology, or even the whether you are using Illumina or you are using ion torrent technology, the sequencing is much easier, but the bioinformatic analysis and cleaning of the data is real problem. And therefore, these days, many of us, those who are on the provide funds and understand the technology, we encourage that it is preferable and cost effective also to go for the commercial gene sequencing. And these days there are newer technologies, the understandings, the PubMed and NCBI and the NIH, they have also generated several. Earlier we all know that PubMed was only known for publications, but now NCBI has several subsystems, and they have how to extract the DNA sequencing, how the CDs are compared, how they are combined, and various combinations, how to design primers. Earlier in my early days, I used to do the primer synthesis, writing on the notebook and then comparing each and every sequence. These days nobody does, but I think this is very important that history of the molecular biology is taught to students. So Dr. Misra, Dr. Tomar, take care of that. You should, your students should know, even though they may or may not use, but I think I am, very fond of history. So in medicine also, I always teach history, because I feel always that we are also going to be history one day. So if you don't respect history, nobody will respect you. So if you respect past, you will be respected. And therefore, whether it is agriculture or medicine or molecular biology or biotechnology, or we, the people, we should respect history, because history teaches you many things. We should not forget our past. We should not forget our history. And therefore, these days, there are hardcore genes, softcore genes, and then, phylogeny. These things you can do in 1 day or 2 days, which was just, a dream for any molecular biologist, used to do. And therefore, I think the workshop should have a spectrum from the, I could see your program, that from the starting from the, history, how the molecular biology evolved, what were the earlier uses, and now it has huge, scope, and it is, can be applied in every sphere of our life, our environment, our economy, our animal science, and everywhere. So therefore, it is, I think, very, very important, and I'm sure that you will be, your galaxy of speakers, I could see, they are very well known in their own fields, so they will be taking care. And to the students, I again re-emphasize and I advise them that, read history, even though, as I said, I re-emphasize that even though these days, the like gel extract, gel running, and the southern, northern, and western blotting, all these things, they are not commonly used, but I will insist that you, the students, you must learn these techniques, because this gives you fundamental understanding. Irrespective, you have automated systems, but until otherwise, that how the pH of the buffer can change your whole result. You will not understand molecular biology. And therefore, I always believe, because my teaching is from PGI Chandigarh, so our teachers used to teach basics always. Because once your basics are clear, your understanding, your foundation of the teaching, and to grow further is rather better. And therefore, from my side, I think I once again, I wish all the best to the organizers and the MIT University in general, and but particularly to students, those who are part of this workshop, I would encourage you to learn as much as possible. That those who are physically present, try to do with your own hands, because other than outside workshop, many of the I know that even though MIT University is doing quite well, but many universities they only demonstrate, they never give chance to do the things by their own hands. And if they are given the opportunity, I think they should utilize this opportunity, unique opportunity. In 7 days, they should do the things with your own hands. And with that, I think with best wishes to my to the students, and the wholehearted thanks to our Lieutenant General Sarmaji, Dr. Kaushik, Dr. Tomar, and Pallavi. Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very much.
Now I would like to request all the dignitaries to kindly release the lab manual. Thank you very much, sir. Now I would like to request Professor Dr. Vikas Jain, IISER Bhopal, to kindly deliver the expert lecture. Professor Dr. Vikas Jain is a professor in biological sciences, IISER. Dr. Jain has completed his PhD in 2006, PhD from Molecular Biophysics Unit, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, India, and Masters in 2001 from Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. His area of research includes microbiology, molecular biology, biochemistry, molecular biophysics. Dr. Jain has done his postdoctorate from Center for Molecular Genetics, University of California, San Diego, CA, USA. He worked as a research associate in Molecular Biophysics Unit, Indian Institute of Sciences, Bangalore, India. Currently, his research group, MMBL, is actively involved in both basic and applied research in bacteriophages. In particular, they are studying the process of phage infection of mycobacteria and the downstream activities that occurs inside the cell post-infection. Please, sir.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and let me begin by thanking the organizers for giving me the opportunity for this presentation. And please let me know if this presentation is visible.
Yeah,
Yes,
yes,
sir.
yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
In the presentation mode, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So yeah, thank you so much. So keeping the theme of the workshop in mind, I have kept this talk very basic, and as Professor Singh said, Professor Sarman Singh said that students must learn the basics also before they move into advanced, so that their foundation is strong. So I have kept this this talk really basic in terms of PCR, gene cloning, and those things. So before move on to the actual talk, let me just quickly tell you what my research, laboratory research is. And we focus in the bacterial research, where we study Mycobacterium as a model organism. We take Smegmatis as model organism because it's non-pathogenic, grows faster. And we study several aspects of Mycobacterium using this as a model organism. And then we also use the bacteriophage as a model organism here, and bacteriophage actually will become the next generation therapeutics because they kill the pathogenic bacteria very quickly, and resistance to phages becomes rather less of a challenge. And several aspects of bacteriophage we study in our laboratory and try to understand how this can be developed as a therapeutics. Now, we also are involved in applied molecular biology research, and this is something that I really enjoy doing in the lab. So we tend to develop a lot of cloning methods and plasmids that eases the cloning procedures that are usually employed in the laboratories. And we also prepare our enzymes sometimes and then use them for the research work. Now, before moving on to the research, let me quickly acknowledge my students. So these are the PhD students that are involved in the research. We also get BSMS students for their final year project work. And I have a project JRF Shinto. He's primarily involved in applied molecular biology work and is also doing other works as well in the lab. And then funding from various funding agencies is acknowledged. And then we have several collaborations also, which are primarily involved for the tuberculosis work and then other aspects of the research. And this is a group photo taken last Diwali because nobody could go home due to the, they had just come back from lockdown. So everybody celebrated Diwali in the lab that time. So that was nice, actually. So the first time the entire group was in the lab and celebrated Diwali. Anyway, so now let me move on to the today's talk, and I'll be discussing primarily the molecular biology tools and methods, but I'll try to keep it as basic as possible. And also, if there are any questions, please, I request students to please just unmute themselves and ask the question immediately. I won't be able to see the message if somebody posts it, and so one has to speak and then tell me what exactly the question. I don't mind taking the questions in between, and also please let me know if I'm exceeding my time slot, so I'll quickly finish it and all. I really enjoy this topic, so I may spill over several minutes. So please let me know when to stop. So before going into the detail of molecular biology, let me just quickly talk about the basics of DNA, because this tells the entire thing about the DNA related molecular biology and recombinant DNA technology. So this is just a general structure of the DNA. What you see here are the two strands of the DNA, and they form a duplex, and the bases are joined together. Bases are together because by means of the hydrogen bonds present. And this is the backbone. This is called as the backbone. The bases are attached with the ribose sugar, and then the ribose sugars come together by means of phosphodiester bond. This one bond here and here, and they form the phosphodiester bond. And the two chains of this DNA are anti-parallel. You see, this is a 5' end, and this goes in this direction, 5 to 3. And this another chain is in this 5' end, and it goes in this direction. So the two chains are always anti-parallel to each other. You cannot have a parallel chain. And this is something that must always be remembered when you are actually designing your PCR experiments and primer designing. Sometimes people do tend to make mistakes and design wrong primers, and so PCR never works, of course. And in this DNA chain, what is very important is when it comes to recombinant DNA technology is this particular bond over here. And this bond has to be, this bond we can call as the business end of the DNA in this case, that all the molecular biology experiments that are done involving polymerases, nucleases, ligases, or any other enzymes, they all involve primarily this end of the DNA. So this ribose sugar, let me quickly label it for you here. So you have the 1, 2, 3 prime. Of course, we call it prime because 1, 2, 3 are reserved for the base, 4 prime, and then 5 prime carbon. So 3 prime is the business end of the DNA. If you have OH over here, it will become RNA, and you don't have OH here. So this is the business end. So OH is required over here in order to do anything. And this OH is shown here at the 3 prime. And that is why we call it a 3' end, because it's present at the 3' ribose, 3' carbon of the ribose sugar. And we call it 5' end because this is the 5th carbon here. And then you have a phosphate group there. All right. So if this is clear, let's quickly go ahead with the understanding of the PCR. That is the most basic technique that is used in molecular biology. And it's equally very basic and very advanced technique, and a lot of basic aspects of PCR must be understood, because then you can actually design your own experiment in terms of various aspects of reactions. So what really is a PCR? We call it, I don't think I have ever specified in all these slides what the full form of PCR is. Like sir said, it's not a police control room, it's actually a polymerase chain reaction, and we call it a chain reaction because substrate gives rise to product, and then product is used as a substrate again to give rise to product. And so once started, it will go on amplifying the molecule. So it's an in vitro amplification of a DNA segment. We call it a segment because you cannot really amplify a large amount of DNA, a large size of a DNA. You can only use it for a small size of DNA. So you can amplify a specific segment of DNA in vitro by artificial DNA replication system. So PCR is nothing but an artificial DNA replication system happening in vitro. And these are the various components of the PCR. You definitely require a template because this is something that you will be copying, and that is your specific DNA segment that you will be copying. Then you require a polymerase. A DNA polymerase is required here because this is the enzyme that will polymerize on a template that will polymerize your nucleotides so that you form a DNA strand. Then you need a primer here. A primer is always required for a DNA polymerase. And then These are the building blocks, so deoxynucleoside triphosphates. We call them nucleoside triphosphates, not nucleotide triphosphates. And then you, of course, need the buffer, and magnesium is always required because any nucleic acid reaction that we generally do in vitro, always you have to add magnesium. So it has more than one role in the reaction. So let's see the components in a little more detail so that we move on with our PCR reactions. So you have the first component template. The template can be either a genomic DNA, and the genomic DNA can be from a bacterium, from any other organism, yeast, human, or any other organism. So genomic DNA can be used as a template. You can have plasmid DNA. These are small circular DNA molecules. It can also act as a template. You can even have RNA as a template, but RNA has to be made into DNA, and then you can amplify that DNA. So this also can be can act as a template, or any other form of DNA. You can have a small linear DNA or a huge DNA molecule, or anything that you extract from some, from old remains or those things. They can be used as template, right? So now the DNA polymerase. This is another very important component. You require in a typical PCR reaction, you require a thermostable DNA polymerase, and it's very important that the enzyme is thermostable. And one of the first enzymes that was used in these reactions was Taq DNA polymerase, which stands for Thermus aquaticus. So DNA polymerase isolated from there can be used readily in a PCR reaction. It has to be thermostable because you will see in a PCR reaction, we tend to change temperature and we go for high temperatures. So it's important to have a thermostable. If you do not have a thermostable DNA polymerase, PCR can still be done, but there are tricks and those techniques involved in this process. The enzyme Taq polymerase, unfortunately, does not have a proofreading activity. And so if proofreading is required, then you must have an enzyme that has a proofreading activity, such as fusion, or there are other enzymes that are available which have very high proofreading activity. And proofreading activity is basically when the DNA nucleotides are being incorporated, and say, for example, if a specific nucleotide is supposed to come here because there was a T in the template instead of A, maybe some other nucleotide was incorporated, the enzyme must be able to correct its mistake so that it goes back, removes it, and then adds a fresh nucleotide. So you must have those proofreading activities. Now, usually this is required when you are using this DNA, amplified DNA, for cloning purpose, for protein production and those things. If you are only detecting a presence of a DNA, then proofreading is really not necessary there. So the Taq polymerase is good enough. And most of the laboratories actually go for those purposes. So they use Taq polymerase. It's a really cheap enzyme and then readily available, so it can be used for various purposes. Next component is primer. This is really important component, and you need to design these primers very carefully. These are small single-strand DNA molecules that are artificially synthesized, and you buy them commercially from the market. You ask them to make it for you, and then you buy them. So these are small single-strand DNA molecules. So usually they are 20 to 25 nucleotide in length, but practically, depending upon your experimental requirement, you can go as low as 6 nucleotide. You have hexamer primers, or you can make it as long as 90 nucleotides or even longer, depending upon the experiment, of course. But when you are going for a typical cloning experiment and you want to make a primer, usually this is the length that we keep in mind. But then again, it's just a guideline. It's not a rule that it must be within this length. So we can always make them work if there are bad primers available. It's not a problem. Now, this primer is a must because unfortunately, DNA polymerase cannot start synthesis of a DNA strand de novo. De novo basically means that if you have a single strand DNA available, and a nucleic acid must be single strand if it can be copied, because the bases must be exposed so that hydrogen bonding can be done. So these are the bases present on this DNA strand, and the hydrogen bonding can happen with these bases. So a new base will come here. When I say base, I mean the nitrogenous base that is attached with the ribose sugar. So this will form hydrogen bond, and therefore, and this is a correct nucleotide that has come forming hydrogen bond, and they can be attached together. And this is your phosphodiester bond, right? The DNA polymerase cannot start synthesizing DNA right from the nucleotide N1. So this is N1 position, this is N2 position. It cannot start adding nucleotide. That's not possible for DNA polymerase. So what we need is we need to provide an artificial primer here, which is hybridized already now on the template. Now, once it is hybridized, you get this 3' OH, that's the business end of the DNA molecule. And a new nucleotide by this DNA polymerase can now be added here with this 3' OH. So in this direction, DNA can now be extended further. But if you do not have this primer, the DNA polymerase cannot do anything on this DNA. So you require the primer for that. These primers, they bind to the target sequence and they provide 3' hydroxyl group for the new nucleotide addition. Okay. Now there's some primer designing guidelines. I'll just quickly tell you one or two in this. You must, while designing this primer, you must avoid secondary structures or dimers. A secondary structure can be a hairpin, so a primer folds on its own. And so this primer will not be available for binding to the target because the strand is inside, or the two primers that you take, they form dimer. And so now they are useless. You cannot use them for the PCR reaction. The TM of the primer should be close to 60. TM is the temperature at which the DNA is half melted. And we'll come to this aspect when we talk about this.
May I
Yes.
interrupt you for a minute?
Yes, sir. Yes, please. Please, sir.
There are a few questions. Actually, the students cannot ask you the questions because they're not panelists.
Okay.
Questions are coming in chat box. Some of our faculty members will ask you in between. So if you allow, we can take the questions also.
Please. I would love to.
I request Dr. Anurag Jyoti to please take up the questions along with the presentation so that it can be more interactive.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, sir. One student has asked question, Ms. Tanya Tomar.
Yes.
Her question is, sir, how are primers synthesized artificially?
It's actually more of a chemistry question than a biology. But what you generally do is that you take chemicals. You take nucleotides and you have a solid support, such as a bead, to which a reactive group is present. It's all chemistry. You add nucleotide here, carry out a chemical reaction. So one nucleotide is added here. Then you deprotect it, and then we add a protected nucleotide so that when we add one nucleotide, it does not start forming a chain. So you add one nucleotide, it will react only once, and now it is immobilized here on the bead. Now you add another nucleotide, whatever you require. Say you require first an A. So you add A and it will be added here. So it has made a chemical bond and now it is present here. Then you make it active. So the group is available. And then now you add T, for example, if you want T. So T will be added here. And now the T is added. Then again, you make it active. Then you add another nucleotide. So that will be added. And this way you can go on to synthesize the primer. Now, once your primer is synthesized, you remove it from here and then you purify it. So that is how it's all chemistry. We cannot synthesize primer using this method. We generally don't, because it will be more expensive, not practical. And this process takes only a few hours and you can make several hundred primers in a day and you can sell them. And they're really cheap. So nobody really goes ahead with such methods, elaborate procedures. I just buy it directly from the market. And you can have any sequence you want over here. Whatever sequence you want. Your sequence primarily is decided by the template that you want it to bind. I hope that answers the question.
So we have one more question.
Yes,
if you allow, I should ask.
Please.
Participant Kritika Gaur, she is asking, sir, how we come to know the primer sequence of unknown sample?
Okay, there are some techniques available for that. So when you say unknown sample, let me assume that, say, you are talking about a bacterium which has a genomic DNA and you do not know the sequence of this genomic DNA. You want to amplify, say, a gene that codes for perhaps a formaldehyde dehydrogenase, and you do not know if formaldehyde, whether this formaldehyde dehydrogenase gene FDH is present in this genome, but we do not know what the sequence is. So there are multiple ways of going ahead with that experiment. One of the ways now that people will actually do is that you directly go for next-gen sequencing, and next-gen sequencing actually will tell you what the genome sequence is. From the genome sequence, you can identify what the FDH sequence is using database search. And once you have the FDH sequence, this is the linear gene sequence that you have. Now you can design the primer here and amplify the gene. So that is one of the ways of doing it. And these are now the modern methods of doing this kind of work. But if you have a linear DNA, for example, and you do not know the sequence, you just have a, say, 1 kb linear DNA present with you and you do not know the sequence, what you can do is, what people now do is that you can attach small linkers, or you can adapters to it. It can be attached like this. And then primers are present in this. which can allow you to sequence this region. So that is possible. Another way is you can clone this in a plasmid and you can now sequence this. So it's possible to find out the sequence of any unknown DNA as long as you have sufficient material to go ahead and do these kind of experiments with it. If it is in a very, very minuscule quantity, then I think the next gen sequencing is what people generally use now to find out the sequence and to design further primers so that you can amplify the DNA. Right. Dr. Jyoti, is that sufficient or?
I think, sir, it's sufficient. I think,
okay.
sir. Yes,
Thank you,
please
sir.
continue.
Please,
Thank you,
please
sir.
interrupt me. Feel free to interrupt me and ask questions. I definitely
Sure.
don't mind at all.
Sure, sure. Sir. Thank you,
All
sir.
right. Okay. So when we are designing such primers, we tend to avoid secondary structures because if the primer folds on its own, then it will not go and bind to the template. It needs to remain single strand so that bases are exposed so that they can hybridize with the template. It's important for them. And the TM of the primer should be close to 60 degree, but then again, this is a value that you may or may not be able to achieve depending upon the sequence over here. So this is a quick formula for getting the TM. May not be applicable for a very long primer or for a very short primer, but then again, you can use this to assess what the primer TM going to be. 4 into G plus C plus 2 into A plus T. These are the nucleotides, number of nucleotides, and you multiply them and you will get a degree C value. And that is sufficient to go ahead with most of the experiments in the PCR. The GC percentage of the primer should be 50%. Why we worry about this GC content is because A and T base pair with 2 hydrogen bonds, whereas G and C base pair with 3 hydrogen bonds. So obviously G and C base pairing is stronger than the AT base pairing. And therefore, if you have way too many GC, they will tend to bind strongly to the template. Now, when they're binding to the template, they can bind non-specifically also. And that is one of the serious problems in PCR reactions. And we have several ways of troubleshooting those things. But what I generally, when I teach recombinant DNA technology course and I go for primer designing session also, I tend to tell them that you spend most of your time here so that you have to spend less time in troubleshooting your PCR reaction. But if there are sequences that you cannot avoid, you have to have 70% GC, TM is always very high, say 80 degree, can't help it. Well, there are PCR methods by which you can troubleshoot your experiments. That is fine, but try and design your primer as carefully as possible so that you don't have to worry about troubleshooting it later. So, all right. So let me move on to other 2 components. We have very basic, the deoxynucleoside triphosphates, which are the building blocks of DNA. If you have NTP, then that will form the RNA, but DNA poly will not incorporate NTP. So we need DNTP for them, okay? And then they must be triphosphates. If you have diphosphates or monophosphates, then they will not work. And then you need the magnesium. Magnesium is required because DNA polymerase catalysis, the enzymatic reaction requires magnesium to be present in the active site. So magnesium is required. It is also required because your DNA is negatively charged. You have phosphate, right? And then, so the oxygen that is present here, which is negative, you require magnesium so that it can be neutralized or it can be taken care of. This charge can be taken care of. So that is also the reason why the magnesium is required in general in the nucleic acid reactions. Okay, so this is a typical cycle for the PCR. When you set up your PCR reaction, you set up, it goes through a typical cycle. On the y-axis, you have temperature, you have x-axis time. So this step is called as the denaturation step, then which is followed by the annealing step and the extension step. So in the denaturation step, you tend to denature your DNA. And I'll come to in detail for that. Why we have to do this is simply because double-strand DNA cannot be used as a template. You need to have single-strand DNA so that the bases are exposed and the bases can be used for the hybridization of or the hydrogen bonding of incoming nucleotides. If you have a double-strand DNA, this hydrogen bonding cannot be done with the double-strand DNA for any reaction, for the PCR or for any other method that you want to follow. So you have to heat up. If you remember the DNA replication in vivo in the cell that happens, it is exactly like that. There the denaturation of DNA happens because the enzyme melts the DNA. So you have the helicase, that this is a replication fork that I have drawn here. You have the helicase which will move forward and will separate the two DNA strands so that the DNA strand is exposed. Okay, so since we do not have helicase here, it will be a costly process. We use heat to denature the DNA. Now, typical temperature of the heating is 94 degree, but you can go up to 98 degree depending upon. So 94 degree is primarily used for if you are using Taq polymerase, but if you are using other enzymes, you can even go to 98 degree. Now, will the higher temperature help you? It will help because if your genome is high GC, then the higher temperature can actually help you in that process. So this is the initial denaturation step. We tend to have this step because what we are ensuring is that the entire material that you have added in the reaction is completely denatured. When we say denatured, we mean the template, primarily the DNA. And this step is very helpful when you're using genomic DNA as a template. If you're using only small linear DNA as a template, this step is really not required. Or small plasmid DNA, if you're using as template, this step is really not required. But when you're using genomic DNA as template, this is good enough. And then you can even go to 5 minutes here, depending upon the size of the genomic DNA or GC content of the genomic DNA. Then you come to step 2, which is actually a denaturation step for a very small period. Since you have already heated the DNA, you don't need to heat it too much. And you go for a 15-second cycle or 30-second cycle, depending again upon the size of the DNA template and the GC content. So the temperature here is not changing, 94 degree, because we are using Taq polymerase in this reaction. Then you go down, bring it down to the annealing temperature. It is the step where your DNA will bind to the primer, or your primer will bind to the DNA, the single strand DNA. Okay, so once the primer has annealed, then you go for the extension step where the DNA polymerase will now extend it further. Now this temperature, of course, this temperature is decided by your primer. And usually this temperature is the TM minus 5 degree. So if your TM is say 70 degree, then it can be 65 or less. If your TM is 60 degree, then your TM can be 55 or less. I say less because depending, it's not necessary that at 55 it will definitely work. Some amount of optimization is generally required. Then you have the extension. This temperature, of course, is decided by the enzyme. Usually it is 72 to 74 degree because at that temperature, the enzyme works efficiently. And this is the speed of the polymerization by the Taq polymerase, 1 kb per minute. So if you are amplifying a 1 kb DNA, then you have to keep this step for 1 minute. If you keep it longer, you are wasting the time here. And at the same time, you are spoiling the DNA because it is exposed to high temperature. Your enzyme is exposed to high temperature unnecessarily. And if you keep it short, you will get actually smaller DNA segments. You will not get a full length 1 kb DNA. So that is how we decide this temperature. And then you go back to heating again. And then this is done for nearly 30 times, 29 times, or 35 times. Number of cycles are decided by, again, if you have smaller DNA and you have used good amount of nucleotides, you can actually go for longer duration. So you can go for more cycles. If you have used enough amount of Taq polymerase, again, you can extend the number of cycles. If you have used some other enzyme, which is even more stable, you can increase the number of cycles. But usually once you have gone for 30 cycles, after that, you don't really see a significant increase in DNA content by this amplification process. So 30 times is usually more than enough. If you started with way too little amount of template, then you have to have more cycles so that it is further amplified. Then this is a final extension step of 72 degree and we keep it a little longer. Usually this time is double the time of this, but you can keep it a little longer. And this is the time when some DNA strands that were not completed, they are completed at this step so that the DNA polymerase finishes the job basically. And then finally you store the reaction at 4 degree. This is a very bad practice though. Sometimes people set up PCR in the night and they leave it in the PCR machine and the machine stays at 4 degree forever overnight. So which is actually a pressure on the Peltier system of the machine. And so it's not very advisable to keep it like this. We keep it at 4 degrees so that the Taq polymerase does not spoil your DNA, or any other thing happens to the DNA. So we generally keep it at 4 degree, but try and ensure that your PCR machine is not running at 4 degree whole night. And then, so because that puts a pressure on the Peltier system that the machine has. And why we use Peltier is because of the following reason. This difference in the temperature from here to here, we call as ramp rate. And this is the property of the machine that you use. And the faster the ramp rate, smaller the time it will take. So it's the time that the machine is taking for either cooling the system or heating the system. So if it can do it faster, it will reach faster like this, or it can even come down quickly. So Peltier systems actually allow this kind of easy ramping of the temperatures, and so the system can start quicker, like this. So this ramping is possible because we are using Peltier, so it's very easy to change the temperature quickly just by applying voltage. So that helps a lot in the PCR reactions. So let me quickly go through these steps. So first step is denaturation, where you heat the system and the two strands are separated. And please note that I have marked the DNA as 5' and 3'. So you have the polarity of the DNA always in the opposite directions. This is 5 to 3, this is 5 to 3 in this direction, okay? And the bases are now exposed. Since the bases are exposed, they will allow the annealing to happen. So the primer will go and bind. And these are DNA segments. Again, they will bind while maintaining the polarity. This strand is running in 5 to 3 like this. So this strand will go 5 to 3 like this. And same is for this primer. So usually, so by default, what we do is that from left to right, when we read, this is what we call as the forward primer, because we are writing it this way, and this we call as the reverse primer. Don't call it backward primer, we call it reverse primer. Okay, so this is always the default. If you rotate it, if you put a point here and then rotate it 180 degree like this, obviously this will become the forward primer, this will become the reverse primer. It is important to note that because whenever you get these primers commercially synthesized, you must always give them sequence in 5' to 3' direction, always, because that is how they read it and they synthesize the DNA strands for you. So if you do not do that, then the primer that you will get may never work for you. So the sequence that we always give is 5' to 3'. So in molecular biology all over the world, it's an understanding that if it's a sequence is written on a piece of paper or on a computer screen, and these 5' and 3' are not specified, it is always believed that the sequence given is always in 5' to 3' direction. So it's a universal law now that everybody believes in that way. So unless you specify the polarity, the sequence that is given is always in 5' to 3' direction. And commercial companies, they always synthesize the DNA after getting the sequence in 5' to 3'. So forward primer is rather straightforward because this sequence is identical to this one because it is complementary to this one. So it will be the same sequence here. It's only when you're designing reverse primer that you have to basically, it should be this sequence, but being read in opposite directions. So you need to accordingly write the sequence and then design it. Okay. Dr. Anurag, are there any questions or I'll move on? Otherwise.
So just now we have one question.
Yes, please.
The one you asked. So one student, Anvesha Bhattacharya, she's asking, is the ramp rate more in case of genomic DNA?
No, actually the ramp rate is something that we don't change. It is there in the machine, and machines are actually sold by mentioning the ramp rate. So the PCR machine, thermal cycler that we get from the market, it has a defined ramp rate. Usually it comes as for heating, we get it, say 5 degree per second, they call it. And for cooling, we get it, say 3 degree per second. It is that fast. So you can change the ramp rate, but it's not really required. It only affects your DNA polymerase primarily, whether your DNA poly is able to sustain that kind of quick change in the temperature or not. And Taq polymerase can sustain this kind of change in temperature without any problem. So for the genomic DNA or for plasmid DNA, any template you use, this ramp rate does not really come into picture. It only tells you how fast your machine can go. So what basically you're doing, you're actually, this is also time. This difference is also time that is added to every cycle that you're using. Say if this difference is, say, about 5 seconds, which will of course be more than 5 seconds because we are talking about 3 degree per second. We are cooling it. We are bringing it from 94 to say 50. That's a change of about 44 degrees. So which means that it will take about say 10 or 15 seconds. So this time of 15 seconds is added in every cycle. which means that you are actually spending about 450 seconds extra in your PCR cycle. And this also ramp rate will add some time. So if you reduce this 450 seconds, so say 60 seconds, you are reducing your PCR reaction time. You are basically saving some time in your PCR so that you can quickly move on to other experiments. So that is what this time really is all about. So it has nothing to do with the template really.
Sir, we have one more question by Revant. So MS Revant, he's asking, sir, how is the duration of PCR calculated?
Okay, you just add the times here. So this is 15 seconds. This is 20 seconds. So that's 35 seconds plus this is 1 minute, let's say 60 seconds. So this becomes 95 seconds, one cycle, plus the ramp rate time. So this I calculated as 15 seconds, and this will be about heating is 5 degrees per second. Say 50 to 72 is about 22 degrees, around 4 seconds is added here. So plus 15 plus 4 seconds. So one cycle now goes to about 115 seconds or so, let's say. Okay. So one cycle actually corresponds to 115 seconds. Now, if you're going for 30 cycles, then that much time you are spending on this portion alone or the cycling alone. This is something that we don't count because once this reaction is over and it has come back to room temperature, you can take the reaction out. You don't have to wait for it to go to 4 degrees. So this 5 minute will be added. This 2 minute will also be added in the total time. So the only time process that you can save here is if you use a faster enzyme. Say if it goes for 30 seconds per kb, you immediately reduce the time here. You can reduce this time also. You can reduce this time, but this is the minimum, bare minimum time that we are using here. So essentially meaning that this is one point where you can save some time by changing the polymerase, and this is another machine. But then machine is already there in the laboratory. You cannot really change it. It's expensive. So I mean, overall, a typical PCR reaction takes about 2 to 3 hours anyway. So that is the kind of time we are looking at here. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, so we have designed the primer. We have added the primer. Now, next step is extension, where we have the polymerase, and once the polymerase binds, it is picking this 3' OH group here, and then it moves on and synthesizes the DNA. So the DNA is now extended. So this one strand is now extended. So now what you have made is a double strand DNA here and here. So now you go on repeating these steps. Again, you denature the DNA, primer will anneal again, you will make more DNA. And at the end of your 30 cycles or 25 cycles or 35 cycles, you will get a large amount of the specific size of your DNA molecule accumulated in the reaction. So that is how a typical PCR reaction works here. Okay. So once this is clear to you, then let me move on to now several variations in the PCR. So when we have problems in terms of specificity of getting a specific DNA band amplified and all, there are some ways by which you can do the troubleshooting. And then there are other methods for the variations in PCR where we can have various other aspects of the PCR done. Okay, so I'll move on to one such variation. It's a gradient PCR. I believe it's there already in your workshop theme also, where you will teach gradient PCR. So what we do in the gradient PCR is that we decide several different annealing temperatures. We basically survey different annealing temperatures to identify what's best for your PCR reaction. So, so you have several reactions set up. Denaturation is at the same temperature of say 94 degrees because you are using it. You are using the Taq polymerase. So you have done the denaturation step. The next step is annealing. Now annealing, I said that it should be typically TM minus 5 degrees, right? Now, when you're using two primers, forward and reverse primer, which TM will you consider for this calculation? You take the lowest TM because higher TM, the lower TM primer may not bind, right? What I mean to say is that, let's say this primer, forward primer, has a TM of, I hope people understood what TM is. Your students, I hope they understood what TM is. So, so I'd say this forward primer is say 60 degree, and the reverse primer TM is, let's say 65 degree, right? Let's say 70 degree, even more difficult example. So the TM minus 5, we will go for 55 degree annealing because because this temperature will ensure that your lower TM primer will at least bind to the, this guy will anyway bind because 55 degrees is much lower than 70 degrees. So it will, this primer will definitely bind. So please note that when you are asking your primer to bind to the template, they will bind whenever the temperature of this reaction is less than the TM. A TM is the temperature where 50% of your DNA is melted, which means that the DNA is separate. So it means that either 50% of this DNA segment is bound or 50% of total primers are bound to the template. So when you are talking about 55 degree, both your forward and reverse primers are now bound here. Okay. But if you keep TM minus 5, say 65 degree, because that can also be TM minus 5, right? 65 degree. What will happen is while your reverse primer will bind, because this temperature of the reaction is 5 degree less than the TM of the primer, your forward primer will not bind to the target. Why? Because the reaction temperature is higher than the TM. So this primer will not be able to bind efficiently here. So if this primer does not bind, you will get the synthesis from here, but this will not work. So you will not see an amplified DNA, right? Now, if you go for 55 degree, what really can happen? Since this TM is higher, but you have reduced the reaction temperature way too much, there's a gap of about 15, 20, 15 degrees over here. So this primer can actually bind besides this place somewhere else also. And this binding we call as non-specific binding. So that you cannot avoid because you see primer is made up of say about 20 nucleotides, right? And even if this 10 nucleotides are present somewhere else in the target, they will go and bind there because the reaction temperature allows that binding. So if that happens, you are getting a non-specific binding also. So your primer is going waste over there. You're also going to get some amount of DNA synthesized from there. So your nucleotides are going waste and your polymerase is involved in amplifying it. So your polymerase is also going waste. So when such a situation arises, what we go for is we go for a gradient PCR where you are now surveying various temperatures present here to find out which temperature gives you the best product. A best product would be you get a single band in the gel. Okay, that would be your best product. An intense band, of course. So in this case, what you can survey is that you can go for TM minus 10 to up to the TM, say 70 degree. Of course, at 70 degree, you will not get any reaction because this guy will definitely not bind no matter what. 10 degree above 60 degree, this primer will never bind. So instead of 70, we can go for 65 because 50% binding you can have at 60 degrees. Some amount of binding may be seen at 65. So this guy will definitely bind. So from 50 degree to up to 65 degree, you can screen. If you don't want to have 65, you can even have 60 degree. So you can screen several temperatures depending upon how much your machine allows and how much reagent you have. You can screen several temperatures and some temperatures will give you specific product, but in less quantity. Higher temperature will always give you less product, but more specific. Lower temperature will give you more product, but some non-specific product will also be there. So that way you can screen several temperatures. Annealing is done, then followed by extension at 72 degree. And then you finally have your product. Check it on the gel and then you will know which temperature actually works best. And why we are doing this exercise to find out what is the best annealing temperature. This exercise is more useful when you are going to use this primer pair all the time in the lab for several. So for example, screening of pathogens or detection of pathogens or continuously amplifying some stretch of DNA from various different samples. So it's best to have a specific temperature available so that you don't have to waste the remaining 9 reactions every time. So that way you can actually run this kind of gradient PCR. It's very helpful there. Okay. So once this is done at every temperature, you are running that cycle for about 30 times or so, and then you look at the final product here on the gel. Then we come to the touchdown PCR. This is rather more interesting because in this case, you get your specific product, which is good enough for you to go ahead with the cloning purpose. It's not good when you are going for screening of various pathogens and all, because this gives very less product, but always gives very specific product. And how touchdown PCR works, that you start with a higher annealing temperature initially, and then you reduce the annealing temperature with every step of PCR. And now these modern PCR cyclers, they give you the option of touchdown directly as a built-in program, where you can just specify how much temperature you want to reduce with every cycle, and it will do the job for you. So what it really happening is, you take one reaction and you start it, your denaturation at 94 degree, and then first annealing is done at higher TM plus 10. So you don't expect any product to be formed. But even if your primer binds somewhere on the template, it can only bind specifically. It cannot bind non-specific, because you're using a very high temperature here. And then extension happens at 72 degree. It's just one cycle you do. Don't go for cycles here. Then you go for next step. And here you are going for cycles. What you're doing is that this T now would be T minus 1. So initially you had, say, 70 degree over here. So usually this T many a times is 72 degree, because this corresponds to this temperature here, or you can even have lesser. Now this T would become 71 degree, because T minus 1 over here. And then with next cycle, it will become 70. With again another cycle, it will become 69, so and so forth. It will go down. So you can go for several cycles here. But how long should you reduce it? Till the temperature reaches Tm minus 5. And this Tm corresponds to the lowest Tm of the primer, lowest primer Tm, lowest Tm primer, sorry. And then you continue with remaining number of cycles. So for example, from 72 to say 55 degree would make it about 17 cycles. And then 17 cycles are done here. So the remaining 13 cycles you can do here. So with these 13 cycles, now you are accumulating that specific product again and again. So you will get lesser amount of product, but it is almost impossible to get to non-specific product in touchdown PCR. It's not that you cannot get, but very close to impossible. So it gives you a very specific product, but this amount of product that you get here is generally good enough for carrying out a cloning or DNA sequencing in vitro and things like that. So that helps a lot in this. Okay. Nested PCR is another method where you are unable to design a primer inside the gene for a specific amplification, because your sequence is high GC rich, or your sequence does not allow binding of a primer properly, or there are repeats present in the sequence. So you start with a primer that binds outside the gene. So we want to amplify this gene, but a primer cannot, if I design a primer here, the problem is this primer can go and bind somewhere else also, probably because the 2 copies of a gene is present in the genome. So it becomes difficult to actually amplify specifically this copy. So what we do is we design a primer outside. So once you have designed the primer outside, you amplify this and you get a product which is longer than your, the gene that you are interested in. Now you design specific primer, amplify it, and you get your product in it. So this is very helpful when say 2 copies of this gene are present in the genome and you want to only amplify this copy. So this way, if these regions are different, then you can design these 2 primers and amplify only that specific copy. So you have to purify this product. Once you have made it, this product is purified and used as a template using these primers, and then you amplify your product here. Now, while doing the nested PCR, having both the primers outside, you can always have this primer along with this one, or alternatively, this primer along with this one. That is also possible and can give rise to specific products. Okay. So that is your nested PCR and allows for amplification of a specific product, especially when you have 2 copies present, or it is not possible to use this primer in the genome because it tends to bind non-specifically, or this primer in the genome because it tends to bind non-specifically. So that time nested PCR helps a lot.
Excuse me, sir. There is, sorry to interrupt you. There is a question from Sneha Srivastava, one of the attendees. She is asking, sir, if the temperature is high or low, then can the reaction be opposite?
High or low? Which temperature are you
I
referring to?
think she has not mentioned clear, but I think she is asking regarding your annealing temperature.
Okay, okay. If the reaction is high or low,
If the temperature is high or
High.
low, then can the reaction be opposite?
I'm unable to understand the question, but let me see if I can try and answer this. So I'm assuming that it's about the gradient PCR right now. So what we do here is that we are taking lower temperature as well as higher temperatures here. These are the two extremes, and in one or more of these reactions, your PCR product will be present here. So the opposite reaction, I don't really know what she really means by reaction would be opposite. Primer binding to the template will happen. So let's say this is your single strand DNA and this is your primer. And this primer is supposed to bind here. Okay. Now, when will this primer go and bind here? Let's say this reaction right now is at 94 degree. When will this primer go and bind here? The TM of this primer that we derive from that formula or by any method is, let's say, 60 degree. So you start reducing this temperature from 94 to say 4 degree, or that is bring it down to room temperature, 25 degree. Okay. So at what step will this primer go and bind to the template? So 94, it won't bind. So as soon as we start reducing the temperature, so let's say we bring it down closer to 65 degree, the primer may bind to the template, but loosely. It will bind loosely because this temperature is still higher than the TM. A TM, 50% of the primer can actually go and bind to the template, or it will remain loosely bound. So your primer is coming closer to the template, but it can easily go away because the thermal energy is enough to dissociate this primer from the template. It will not stay there. Now, when you reduce it even further, say bring it to 60 degree, what happens is that the primer is there, and in 50% of the cases, it is not there. That is how we describe it. So basically, if you try and synthesize the DNA by the DNA polymerase at 60 degree annealing, you will still get the product, but the product amount will be less because primer is loosely bound to the template. Okay. Once you reduce this temperature further, this binding will start becoming stronger and stronger because the primer can now not go away unless you heat the reaction again. So once you bring it down to 55 degree, that is TM minus 5, the primer is bound to the template sufficiently strong that you will get a product. Any lowering of the temperature does not necessarily affect this binding anymore. Once it is bound, it is bound. So whether or not you bring it down back to 25, it is not going to help any further in increasing the efficiency of this binding. It will stay bound. And that is the reason at which actually sometimes people ask, so once your primer is bound at 55, you are heating the reaction again to 72 degree. Why would the primer not go away that time when you are polymerizing the reaction? So once you have bound the DNA to the template, you really need to heat it again so that you can dissociate it. 72 degree temperature is not sufficient to again dissociate it because your primer length is enough. 20, 25 nucleotides, they will not go away unless you heat it back to 80 plus, 90 plus degrees. They will not go away. Besides, at 72 degree, this efficiency will be definitely lesser. It will not be zero, but it will be lesser. It will not be 100% of the original, but it will be lesser. But your polymerase is good enough because it is getting that 3' hydroxyl group. It can extend it further. It's not a problem. So, so when you reduce the temperature, it is this temperature that we try and optimize so that your primer binds to the target site at a specific site. It does not bind non-specifically. You must know that there are, say, if I say 20 nucleotides are present, I am trying to see that these 20 nucleotide sequence is present only in this position in the target. So if you have a huge target present, those 20 nucleotides are present only here. They are not present anywhere else, right? And this, when I assume this, I am considering all the 20 nucleotide sequence in that sequence only. What happens is that if I break it down into say 5 nucleotide stretch, then say this 5 nucleotide can actually present anywhere in the genome, correct? Probability of this 5 nucleotide will be higher anywhere. Probability of this 5 nucleotide will be they may be present elsewhere, but the probability of all 20 nucleotide together will be very, very less. So what happens in non-specific binding, when you reduce the temperature too much rapidly, then these 5 nucleotides, they can go and bind elsewhere. Now, once your primer is stuck there, it will not come out unless you heat it again. So your primer will stay there. And if polymerase extends it from there, what you actually have done is you have copied your primer on the template now. So that becomes an issue. Okay. So with these methods, what we try and optimize is a temperature where you get maximum amount of specific binding to the target. Okay. So, I mean, she can ask again in case I have not answered her question.
No, sir. I think you have clearly answered the question.
Okay.
Yes, it is clear. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is your touchdown and nested PCR. So nested PCR is done. Let's go to site-directed mutagenesis, which is really common in all the molecular biology labs. And why we do site-directed mutagenesis is we want to incorporate specific mutation in the target DNA. So if you have a DNA molecule in a plasmid or linear DNA molecule, let's say, I've drawn the plasmid because we usually carry out in plasmid, and there is a specific sequence, but you want to mutate some particular nucleotide, you want to change into something else, that is possible by means of SDM, site-directed mutagenesis. So you design 2 primers, and that primer must carry the specific mismatch here. So this is a mismatch. Why we call it mismatch is, let's say in the template, it was A. So in the primer, it is supposed to be T here, but instead T, we have some other nucleotide. So when your primer binds to the template, a typical primer binds like this, but a mutation primer will bind something like this. Because these bases will not hybridize, because let's say this was A here, and we made an A here. So they will not hybridize. A can hybridize only with T, base pair with T. Now this is A. So this is a mismatch. And same mismatch we are keeping in the bottom, in the reverse primer also. So this would be T in the template because it's an AT base pair. And let's say I kept an A over here in the primer. So I will keep a T in the primer here, because this is how it is a mismatch here. So when we amplify this reaction, this will form a strand, this will form a strand. And now you got a double strand DNA, which is having mismatches in its molecule. Now this side-active mutagenesis is significant when you want to mutate a particular amino acid in the protein. So you go back to its gene, change the codon, and again you transform it, and then you get your final product. Now, once you have carried out this mismatch, how do you find out whether you have a mutated DNA or wild type DNA? How do you differentiate between the two? You ask an enzyme DPN1 to do the job. Why DPN1? Is because this is a restriction enzyme, and it cuts the DNA only when the base is methylated. And your plasmid will be methylated because you have isolated it from bacterium, which carries the methyl transferases. So plasmid will always be methylated. And GATC is a tetranucleotide, which will be very commonly present in the DNA sequence, and there will be methylation present in here. So when you treat it with DPN1, newly synthesized DNA with the nucleotides that you have provided will not be methylated. So DPN1 will not be able to cut the newly synthesized DNA, but the original plasmid DNA will be cut by DPN1. So it will cut at various places. It will cut it so much that when you transform bacterium with this DNA, this nicely cut DNA cannot give rise to a colony when you select it eventually on the antibiotic. I'll come to that aspect also in a minute. So that is how we can carry out the side-directed mutagenesis. That's very common in a lot of structural biology lab, biophysics lab, biochemistry labs and all, where you want to change the amino acid of a protein, or you want to change a sequence in the tRNA or some other gene, or you want to change some, make some mutation, a specific mutation at a specific site. Now, when you have made such mutations, how do you screen for mismatches? Is also, this is one very nice technique. It's called MAMA PCR, mismatch amplification mutation assay. And it's a very interesting method. What you do is that in a typical PCR reaction, the business end of the DNA, like I said, is 3' hydroxyl group, right? That 3' hydroxyl group is carried by a base, right? And that base must be hydrogen bonded with the template. If your template is like this and your primer is binding nicely, then this region can be extended. This primer can be extended. But if there is a mismatch here, your primer will bind something like this. So there is no base pairing here. If you have a situation like this, this cannot be extended by the DNA polymerase. Can you, you can see it now, I think. So if this is how the primer is binding, it cannot be amplified. If this is how it is binding, it can be extended. Okay, so there is a mismatch here, primer is unable to bind. So what you have here is that this primer is binding perfectly because there is no mismatch here, so it can be extended. But if you have a mismatch in the template and you use the same primer, this will not bind, this will not hydrogen bond. So amplification cannot happen. So you need to use a primer which will be able to hydrogen bond with the template, and that can be amplified. So if you want to screen for mutations and SNPs, for example, single nucleotide polymorphisms and all, you can use such primer which can easily differentiate between one base versus the other. You can find out whether the mutation is there or not. And this kind of experiments are actually done with the allele specific PCR. So you have, for example, two alleles where you have one A, you have an A present here in one of the allele and you have a C in another allele. So you design two primers which are allele specific. Why they are allele specific is because while one primer will bind to the template, this other primer cannot bind to this allele. And you have a conserved sequence which can act as a reverse primer. So this sequence is conserved in the two alleles. So this primer will work for this allele and the other primer, this one, will work for this allele. So if you want to amplify this allele, you can find out this primer. And if you want to amplify this allele, you can use this primer. So that way you can actually do allele specific PCR amplification from the genomic DNA. And it's a very straightforward method. Assembly PCR is something really interesting where you can in vitro synthesize a large segment of DNA by using small oligos or small primers. And these small primers can be assembled. They are having complementary sequences, so they can come together, hydrogen bond. The arrow here represents the 3' hydroxyl group. So polymerase will extend this further. It has been extended. This has been extended. So once they are extended further, then you use these terminal primers. You got the entire template and you can amplify the entire template. So this way you can actually get the entire double-stranded DNA synthesized from double-strand DNA synthesized from small oligos. These oligos or primers must have complementary sequences so that they can come and sit together. Then only it is possible. And this is very common when you are actually going for a deletion or an addition in a PCR. So overlapping PCR is another variation. So I think that I'll quickly finish it. I hope I am not taking way too much of your time. So I think another 10 minutes, I guess I should be able to finish. I'm hoping. Overlapping PCR is very common when you want to delete a segment of the DNA from a gene. So for example, you have a long, let me use this. You have a long gene and you want to delete a specific segment from this gene. So you amplify this segment, and it's possible to delete this segment. So let's say in this long DNA, this is the gene, and this yellow portion is something that you want to delete and clone the remaining gene. So you make primers for this segment and you make primers for this segment, and then you amplify them and you have the two fragments now. But how do you put them together? They should be fused together. Then only it will become a gene. Otherwise, these are just two DNA segments, right? So what we do is that we modify these primers such that they carry extra nucleotide sequence, which of course will not hybridize with the template. It is not binding to template. That's why I have drawn it like this. Now, this is red color because this sequence over here is complementary to this primer. And this sequence over here is complementary to this primer. Since I am setting up this reaction in one tube, this reaction in other tube, I don't have the problem of this primer coming and binding to this primer. So that problem is sorted out. So it's not a problem here. So when you use such primers with extra sequence here, so you see this sequence is complementary to this. So I have already skipped this entire portion. So when you get the final product, the product will be something like this. This blue is this one, and this red is this one. Same is over here. This blue is this one, and this red is this one. So obviously this sequence is complementary to this one. Okay. Now what you can do is a complementary sequence is nothing but a primer template, where a primer must be able to provide a 3' OH. That's all. So these complementary sequences are going to do the same thing. Now you put them together, use a primer, this one and this one. Basically, this is the same, and this primer is same over here. So use these primers, put them together, and you will get a fusion. I'm sorry, I have not used the red color here, but it's basically entire thing coming together. So it will be blue and this portion will be red. Okay. So this is how it will be. So you have fused, you have got a product where this portion of the DNA has been deleted. Now these two guys will come together because when you do a denaturation and annealing, these sequences are complementary. So they will also do a binding. So this can be extended here because this is 3' OH, and this can be extended here because this is 3' OH. So this will act as a primer for this template. This will act as a primer for this template. So they will be extended. Now you have got a complete template, and you're using this primer, which will bind here, and this primer, which will bind here, and you can amplify this DNA. I hope this is clear. I'm not going too fast in this. If please ask questions. I don't mind. Anurag, if there are questions, please let me know.
Sir, right now we don't have any question. As and when it will posted, I'll definitely ask.
Sure. All right. So that's overlapping PCR. So there are many more variations in PCR that of course you can go to the internet and read about it, but these are the very basics of variations in PCR that a typical molecular biology lab uses all the time, especially the site-directed mutagenesis and the overlapping PCR for the deletion of the DNA segment. You can also add the DNA segment in essentially the same way. You just have to design the primer accordingly and put them together so that they hybridize. And similarly, you have many other variations that can be used for developing another method for detection of pathogen, detection of bacteria, or detection of a mutation in the genome, and things like that. A lot of things can be done if your concepts are clear regarding the PCR. So let's quickly move on to cloning, and I'll try and finish it in another 5-10 minutes or so. So what is cloning? Is just amplifying a specific piece of DNA by a bacterial cell. So PCR is amplifying the DNA segment in vitro following an artificial polymerase chain reaction or an artificial DNA replication system. Cloning is amplifying the DNA by bacterial cells. So bacteria will make multiple copies of a DNA segment, and that is what really a cloning is. And you require for cloning a cloning vector, which is a small DNA molecule which can replicate, and it can carry a foreign DNA fragment with it. And this DNA will not be destroyed. This is a foreign DNA introduced in a cell, but this DNA will not be destroyed by the cell. Okay, that is important. So for a cloning vector to be used, it should have few features that allow it to function properly in a cell and be used as a cloning vector. One is that this cloning vector must be able to replicate on its own. So in a bacterial cell, you have genomic DNA present, right? You have a lot of genomic DNA here. Now, these cloning vectors or these DNAs, these are also called as the plasmid DNA. But there is a slight distinction between plasmid and a vector. Okay, so one has to be converted into other by carrying out certain additional features here. So these plasmid DNA molecules, they are present here as circular DNA molecules. They are present in large quantity, they are present. So while bacterium carries only one copy of the genomic DNA, it cannot have two copies, of course, it will have only one copy. These plasmids can be in n number, and n can be as small as 1. There can be single copy plasmid also, or it can be as high as 1,000. So there can be 1,000 such molecules roaming around here in this cytoplasm of the bacterium. Okay. Now, how do plasmids maintain their copies in the cell? Because they have origin of replication. So they can replicate and make more copies of themselves in this cell. In a single cell, I'm talking about so many copies. So they must be having origin of replication. So both plasmid and vector will have origin of replication. They should have an antibiotic resistance gene, which will act as a selection marker. Why do we need a marker now? See, when a plasmid is present in a bacterium, you must note that it is a burden on the cell, because this is something bacteria did not ask for. It does not have any purpose of this plasmid present in the cell. So this plasmid, in order to be behaving like a gentleman guest rather than a parasite in the cell, it should offer some advantage to this bacterium. If it is not offering any advantage, there is no benefit bacterium gets from this, and there's no point of keeping this DNA. When the bacterium is keeping a DNA in the cell, you see, and it is replicating also, the problem is that it is able to eat up the nucleotides so that it will replicate. It will eat up the bacterial nucleotides, and that will not be available for the bacterium. It will eat up a lot of DNA polymerase. It will eat up a lot of material from the bacterium. So in return, this should offer something to the bacterium. And one of the most common things that it gives back to bacterium is antibiotic resistance. If this bacterium is present in an environment where there is some antibiotic present, let's say ampicillin. So if this plasmid can offer bacterium the ability to grow in the presence of ampicillin, then this bacteria will be very happy and it will happily keep the plasmids with it. But if it cannot offer this resistance to ampicillin, then the bacterium will just get rid of this plasmid somehow. So the plasmid must have an antibiotic resistance gene, which we are using as selection marker in our molecular biology experiments. Okay, so plasmid will have the origin of replication and antibiotic resistance gene, but the vector has one thing additional. It has a cloning site, which we call as multiple cloning site. And what these sites are, so besides having the origin of replication and the selection marker, it needs to be having multiple cloning sites. So these are the restriction enzyme sites which can cut the DNA and open it. Why do we need to open a circular DNA for cloning purpose? Just like I told in the beginning, the business end is required. The 3' OH is required. In a circular DNA, this is not there because the DNA is closed, right? It's like this. So there is no 3' OH available. So nothing can be done. The polymerase will not work, the ligase will not work, or other enzyme will not work. So in order for 3' OH to be available, you need to break this and open it like this. So the 3' OH is available so that now the business can be done. So you need nuclease enzymes which can cut the DNA. And if you want to cut the DNA at specific site, you need restriction enzymes which are always cutting the DNA at specific sites. So you have restriction enzymes. They were discovered in bacteria, primarily found in bacteria, and the bacteria use them for defense, but we started using them in recombinant DNA technology. So they cut the DNA by again breaking the phosphodiester bond, and they are giving rise to 5' phosphate and 3' OH. And it is that 3' OH that is required for various purposes. They bind to and recognize the specific site, and then they cut it. And each site is about 4 to 6 nucleotides, and they are palindromes. So if I write GAATTC, then this is also GAATTC. You read it this way, you read it this way, they read the same. So that's a palindrome sequence. Okay, so let's see this picture again. It is this 3' OH over here. Okay, so this 1, 2, 3' OH over here. It will cut this bond. So you will get the 5' phosphate with this and 3' OH here. Okay, so that is how the nucleus cuts. These are some enzymes that is shown here. So when an enzyme cuts it, this sequence, they generate cohesive ends or sticky ends. Why they call sticky ends is because these can hydrogen bond with this one. This guy can hydrogen bond with this one. So they will come together again. Okay, so these enzymes will not cut the bacterial DNA, the genomic DNA they will not cut because the bacterial DNA is methylated and the enzyme is inhibited because of those methylations. So we don't have to worry about that. But the modifications have been done in these enzymes so they can tolerate this methylation also now. So some enzymes create cohesive ends, other enzymes cut the blunt and create the blunt ends, and these are some enzymes. So they have been isolated from specific bacterium, and accordingly they have been labeled HINT3, EQR1, BAMH1, Let's not worry about TEC1, not many people use it. So these are the 3 enzymes that are very, very common. They recognize a specific sequence and accordingly cut the 2 phosphodiester bonds. So one in this strand, another one in the bottom strand. Similarly here, this one and this one. So they cut these strands and they generate sticky ends. So this guy can come together, right? So they are sticky ends. If they cut right in the middle, it will be a blunt end. So it will be like this, blunt end, okay? All right, so just a quick asking here. So which of these sites will be cut by the EcoR1 enzyme? EcoR1 recognizes GAA-TTC sequence. So both are GAA-TTC sequence, but only this one will be cut by the enzyme. This one cannot be cut because, like I said in the beginning, the polarity of the DNA matters a lot. So here we have specified the top strand is written 3' to 5'. So 5' sequence to 3' is CTTAAG. Hence, this cannot be recognized by EcoR1 and EcoR1 will not cut it. So it can cut only this sequence. So this is really important when you are looking for the restriction sites and how to do the cloning experiments. Okay, so a typical cloning experiment involves cutting the DNA, the plasmid DNA with the enzyme, cutting the insert, the PCR product or something with the same enzyme. Now these enzyme ends are complementary here, and so they can be put together. And the enzyme that we use to join them together is the ligase. While the nucleus cuts the phosphodiester bond, ligase will again form the phosphodiester bond. And so it will join the DNA together. Once
Sorry,
the DNA,
request you to please wind up.
yes, these are just
because-
two last slides. Yes, I'm very sorry for taking too much time. So then once you have ligated them, you put them in the bacterium and then you find out whether they are, whether you have got a clone or not. And the cloning can be confirmed by either you isolate the plasmid DNA again, do a digestion and gel mobility, you can check, or another variation of PCR, you can do colony PCR, basically the plasmid that you isolate, you can run a PCR on it, or you can take the colony, boil it in water, take the product, and then run a PCR on it, and that will also give rise to product. Then you can have DNA sequencing to verify whether the cloning is done. So this is the template where the DNA polymerase joins these two together to form a DNA strand, and you use deoxynucleotide triphosphate. And this is the 5' and the 3' OH that are required. But in the case of DNA sequencing, that is Sanger sequencing, we use dideoxynucleotide where you don't have hydroxyl group at the 3'. Since you do not have 3' hydroxyl group, this reaction cannot happen. And for detection, we either label it with radioactivity, either this end or this end is labeled, or you go for fluorescent labeling of the base. And in today's time in Sanger sequencing, we have this as fluorescent label. And that allows for a large scale sequencing, a rapid sequencing by means of the Sanger, because this fluorescence can now be detected by the laser and detector, and then you can read the sequence directly. So a large DNA segment can be quickly sequenced by the modern Sanger sequencers. So that is how the DNA sequencing can tell you whether it's a positive clone or whether there's a mutation in it. So I think that was my last slide. I'm sorry for taking too much time. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for the informative lecture. May I now request Professor Dr. R.S. Tomar, Director AIB and Dean Academics, MIT University, Madhya Pradesh, Gwalior, and convener of the workshop to kindly give vote of thanks. Professor Dr. R.S. Tomar, MSc, MPhil, PhD, is the Director of MIT Institute of Biotechnology, Dean Life Sciences and Dean Academics, MIT University, Madhya Pradesh, Gwalior. He has been founding campus head of MIT Gwalior. Professor Tomar has more than 28 years of teaching and research experience in varied disciplines of life sciences. Professor Tomar is actively engaged in research and innovation. His research interest includes environmental biotechnology, nanobiotechnology, microbiology, and herbal medicines. He has supervised 5 PhD scholars for the award of PhD, and currently 5 scholars are pursuing their PhD under his able guidance. Presently, he is the PI of a research project funded by MPCST Bhopal. He has to his credits more than 129 research papers published in national and international journals of repute. He has published 7 patents and filed 5 patents. He has also published 24 book chapters, including 5 books. Now, I would like to request all of you, sorry, sir. Now, I would like to request you, sir,
Thank you, Dr. Pallavi. First of all, before I propose vote of thanks on inauguration of this third national workshop, hands-on training on advanced techniques in molecular biology, medical biotechnology, industrial microbiology, and bioinformatics, I would like to mention here that this is our third national workshop in a series being conducted by MIT Institute of Biotechnology. Previously, sir, we have conducted two similar workshops in 2016 and 2018 on similar theme. And for this particular workshop, actually, we were planning to conduct in 2020, but because of COVID, we could not do that. Because whenever we talk about the workshop and hands-on training, then we need the physical presence. So somehow we could be able to manage, not fully, but yes, in hybrid mode, we are able to do it. So for the present workshop, we allowed the participants to come physically, but not many. So we have got good number of registrations, and we are having the overwhelming response after, since we are opening after 2 years of COVID period. So there were overwhelming response for this particular workshop, and we are having limited seats, 30 seats only. But looking to the interest of the candidates, we increased it up to 40. So 40 candidates have been registered. They are the faculty, they are the students, the research scholars from various institutes of India. Today, I could see that there are more than 120 attendees online. And those 120 attendees were really very much interested. They showed their interest in this workshop. And I was really happy to see this, that how much they're interested in this particular workshop. We all know that no event can be successful without people who dedicate their resources and time to make sure everything is faultless. So today, I, Professor Dr. R.S. Thomer, on behalf of MIT Institute of Biotechnology, MIT University Madhya Pradesh, Gwalior, and the entire fraternity of the institution, first of all, extend my most sincere thanks to the Almighty God for making today's event a resounding success. With His blessings and grace, we could be able to make this event happen today. I extend a hearty welcome, hearty vote of thanks to the chief guest of today's program, Professor Dr. Sarman Singh, Director AIMS Bhopal, for accepting our invitation and sparing his valuable time from his busiest schedule, as he told today, to grace this occasion. Today, we had an opportunity to hear your thoughts, and this will surely be going to encourage us in our future events. Your love for history of biological sciences is world clear. जग जाहिर है सर, आप हमेशा इसको मेंशन करते हैं, and you always emphasize to teach historical background of all the discoveries being made in the scientific fields. You are right, sir. If we do not remember our history, then no one will remember our contributions too. Thank you, sir, for your thought-provoking ideas. I am thankful to Honorable Vice Chancellor Lieutenant V.K. Sharma for his encouragement and support throughout the workshop planning till execution of 7 days workshop from hands-on training program. I am thankful to Pro Vice Chancellor Dr. MP Kaushik, who is with us since the last more than 6 years, always guiding us and encouraging us. Thank you very much, sir. I am very grateful to Professor Dr. Vikas Jain, IESER Bhopal, for accepting our invitation to deliver an expert lecture on tools and methods in molecular biology. Sir, your knowledge about various tools and experiment has really enlightened us, and enlightened about the minds and the people who are already online, and they were listening to you, and they were so much interested in your lecture. They were putting the questions in chat box, and I was seeing that some of the students were giving 2 or 3 more questions, but since due to short of time, we could not allow them. So it was really a very interesting lecture, sir. Thank you very much for giving a new insight in this particular field of biology, that is the molecular biology. Never ending, sir. It's always evolving field. So thank you very much. I would also like to thank Head of Institutes, faculty members, Registrar, Director Administration and his team, IT Department and Accounts Department, especially our Amit Keswani. He was always helping to matching the contributions given by the participants and reporting us on time-to-time basis. So thank you very much. Thank you all. Thanks are also due to students and faculty members from outside MIT University Gwalior. Because of you, we could be able to organize this workshop in hybrid mode, and your presence is really very valuable for all of us. And with that only, we shall be conducting the 7 days hands-on training program along with some expert lectures. I wish to thank faculty, staff, and students of AIB for their untiring efforts in making this workshop happen today. At last, but not the least, I thank all those who directly or indirectly supported in organizing this third National Workshop of the series. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Now I would like to request all of you to move to various technical sessions by joining
Thank you,
the
sir.
sessions
Vikas sir, thank you
provided.
very much for spending valuable time. I'm really thankful to you, sir.
Thank you so much. So
And I hope and request that whenever we request you to please accept our invitation, and so many things are left today, and we would like to have another lecture of yours for our students on some of the platforms, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
for
you so
hosting
much,
me.
sir. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.
You can close now.